Welcome everyone for joining. Welcome. This is where we have some difficult conversations, but they are made productive. Because for the past 2.5, 3 years, I've worked on a system, the EPIC system, which we'll go over, sort of gives these conversations a bit of a framework and allows them to be connective and productive. We know there's a lot of conversations that are unproductive out there. We don't want to be a part of those. We want the productive ones. So the 4 rules, very, very important. I will go over the 4 rules and then I will need you all to verbally agree. The 4 rules are to be honest, 100% honest. If you're thinking something you're not sharing, we don't get anywhere. So honest. The second is to listen rather than wait to speak, really listen. The third is to commit to the conversation. Even if it gets uncomfortable, ideally no one bails, we all stay. And the 4th one is the most important, it is to shift chairs. That when someone is talking about their point of view, really try and shift chairs to what it's like to look at the world from their point of view. We know how each of you think and feel about situations. We don't know the other people. That's why we're doing this, is to connect and find other perspectives. So I'm going to ask you at the end when you shifted chairs. And so really be aware of it, as you're going through this, when someone's talking like, oh, I did shift chairs. I totally got that. So those are our 4 rules. Do I have verbal confirmation from each of you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great. So what we do is we start with equalization. And I found over many years that the worst way to begin a conversation is to discuss the things you don't have in common. It's the absolute worst way. So I want to start with an equalizer, which is just something we can all discuss as we warm up to each other, which is, let's see, I want to know what your favorite birthday or Christmas gift was as a child. What was your absolute favorite gift? Again, whatever comes to mind, and why. I think mine was, my 4th birthday, I got a sandbox. And I think I spent the next 3 years inside the sandbox. Like, I don't remember doing homework out of the sandbox. I don't remember having meals out of the sandbox, but that sandbox became the first thing that was mine. I shared a room with my sisters. That was my space, my sandbox. It was the first thing that I ever owned. So mine was the sandbox, and the beginning of the nation of Riazistan. I got a little bit of territory that I could have my own little nation. When you have 2 older sisters, that's very important to have your own space. All right, Greg.
Probably, I got a Huffy bicycle. I guess I was about 10 or 11 or so, and then I was I'm the oldest of 4 boys, and so when I got my bike, we were set up bricks to see how many bricks how many bricks can you set up on a ramp to go. So we did that. So we ended up with a few broken bones. We ended up with some cuts and scrapes, but it was a memorable. I still have pictures of it today. I go back and look at my mom's picture albums, and there's pictures of us in the middle of just household bricks, 4 or 5 high, and we're all up in the air. And it was probably some of the most memorable times I've had. It was pretty fun.
I remember wanting a Huffy bike. I didn't get one. I remember wanting Sonia, tell me, and I think there you are. Tell me what your favorite childhood gift was.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was also bicycle. I was a very active child and liked playing, in the dirt. I was an athletic little girl. I went on actually to play Division I basketball later in life. So I liked playing with the boys, and I really wanted one of those cool Huffy dirt bikes. I wanted that cool boys bike, and I got this kind of 10 speed that I still liked riding, but I did want that cool dirt bike that I never got until I grew up and bought it for myself. Yeah.
Did you have what was it? The tassel handlebars? They would put that.
I probably had those when I was younger. I don't really remember. I think I actually rode the neighbor's bike a lot. I was the youngest of 3. So it was a lot of hand-me-downs, so nothing was ever super special, I guess. Yeah. So, but this was my first, this was more like a road bike that I got, that was mine. And I was, I grew up in the suburbs. So I could, ride around the streets and stuff, but I wanted to be in the woods, jumping off logs and stuff. Yeah.
Sonia is a badass, apparently. Everyone's
I wish.
Sean, best gift.
Mine was for my 8th Christmas birthday. Christmas, I still believe in Santa Claus, and my dad got us a Nintendo. And it was one of those things where it got delivered to, my parents were divorced, so it got delivered to the house when I went to sleep, and I woke up and it said from Santa Claus, and it was a Nintendo, and I was like, wait, Santa Claus came to the house? And, believed it. I was like, Santa's real still. It's a Nintendo. And yeah, that was my favorite one.
That's an awesome gift from Santa.
Was it? I mean, especially for that time, yeah. For my mom, I mean, we didn't get to keep it at home. My mom was like, "This is not staying in the house at all. Like, it's going with your dad."
Oh.
You could have played video games with my mom growing up, so I was like, "It's gonna be at your dad's house. When you see your dad, you could play that." So it was one of those moments, like, "Great, thanks, Santa."
Nice.
Was
Santa.
that Mario Brothers time?
Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. That's it.
Nice.
Donkey Kong.
There you go.
Yeah, we didn't have video games in my house. We just completely overlooked, like never had them. We grew up in rural Maryland, and I don't think my dad really knew about it. So it was sort of like the entire thing went by, and we were like, everyone else has one. We just didn't. I'll move past it at some point in this conversation. So what I want to talk today about is policing. And the idea of this conversation is, what should policing be? And we can discuss, what are the pitfalls? What are the realistic problems? Greg, what's great about having you here is your background in law enforcement, obviously. I think a lot of these conversations happen without someone from law enforcement who can say, well, that's not really practical, or that's not really doable, or in my experience. And the point of these conversations is that we look at life from each other's life experiences. That, Greg, you're not speaking for your department or anyone else other than you, and what you sort of know and what you've seen and what you've experienced.
That is
so ideally, what is a best case scenario for this conversation for you, Greg?
I think it's what you have to take out of the conversations you have in policing is take the I out of the conversation. Well, this happened to me. Well, I think I did this, or I do that. You have to look at it as a community as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
I have 25 years in a heavily minority neighborhood. Our actual, in the last census, our minority population was 88.1%. And 81% of that is an African-American community. And I worked within that community for 25 years. And over the years, you get called a lot of names. You get called. You get all of those things. But what's important to stay focused on is the issue at hand, directly with the problem that you are called. They just don't. People don't call the police to their house because they just want to go, "Hey, how you doing today?" Mm-hmm. They call us in because there's a problem and they need our help. So I try to assimilate as best that I can within the community that I was working in, and try to assimilate. Can I know where some of the problems lie, or some of the pitfalls that another person may have had? Absolutely not. I can't. We weren't rich. We weren't middle. My family and I, we weren't middle class, but we had cars repoed. We missed bills. We did all those things, but there is no way that I can understand what somebody even close to my age, probably in the 35-ish, 40-ish range of an African-American male goes through in their lifetime, of how they cope with what's their coping mechanism, or how they cope with day-to-day life happenings. Mm-hmm. It's very, very hard to do. I really try to get into the head of whoever I'm dealing with at the time, just so that I can try to understand what they are, what is their goal, and with me. What can I do? And I'm trying to take the I out of it, but mm-hmm. You've called me there for a reason. What can we do as a community and as a force to help you get to the goal you're seeking? Mm-hmm. So yeah, and that's a really, really hard. It's a hard thing to do. We go through all kind of training with de-escalation and what we call CIT. And you don't just pick that up overnight. That is years and years of experience. I've had guys that walk in right out of the academy, and they've got people all in an uproar. And I walk in, and I say ask 2 or 3 questions, and I talk real calm, and they go, "Well, I want to talk to you. Let's come over here." And we find a common resolution to whatever the issue they have. A lot of times sometimes I have to tell people, you may not like the answer that I give you, but here's what the law says, and here's the options that you have. So that's basically how I try to approach each problem.
Now let me ask you, watching what's happening, watching what's unfolding with the protests, some are reasonable, some are not. Some people's voices make sense, some people don't. It's a lot of people in this conversation. From your perspective, what do you see as things that law enforcement could do better? What do you think is the problem at the core? Or do you not think there's a problem at the core? What is your perspective?
There is a disconnect between the community in and of itself. I'm from, many of you may not know, I'm in the metro Atlanta area. So we're in a tough spot right now.
Yeah.
We just had Sunday evening, Saturday night. We had a shooting of an unarmed black man in a Wendy's parking lot. Well, the Wendy's got burned down. People wanted to blame all these different organizations. They wanted to try to blame Black Lives Matter and all these other things. When the real truth of the matter is as some of the video that I've seen, it was a middle-aged white woman who burned the building down. It wasn't the Black Lives Matter folks. Those folks are trying to get their voices heard. They aren't tearing stuff up. It's the Antifa people who are tearing things up. So you have to connect with the community in and of itself at a level where you can, again, try to help the problem and not make it any worse.
Mm-hmm.
So
let me ask you, Sean, from your perspective, Black man in Dallas, what do you see as the issues going on specifically with law enforcement? When we discuss racism, we can discuss that, but specifically with law enforcement, from your perspective, what do you see as the biggest problem, issue, concern, disconnect?
I think we were talking about before, I think the problem is with the use of power. I think at a certain point, police officers have a lot of power, they wield a lot of power, but there's a way that you could use your power to, like I said, de-escalate certain situations. And I think people are scared of police officers. So you always have that tension, like, oh, I got pulled over by a cop, so I'm going to react differently. And then the cops are like, okay, you're going to react the way, I'm going to react this way. And at the end of the day, they have the upper hand because they are the law. That to me, that's where the disconnect is in that sense. As a Black man, if I get pulled over by cops, I try not to react weird. I'm like, okay, how can I stay calm myself, make sure that I'm doing everything correctly so I don't feel like I'm intimidating a police officer, because at the end of the day, it is their power.
Do you get pulled over?
They do have a lot of power. They do have a lot of power, and it's I don't know if necessarily power is a good word. They have a lot of authority. Power. There is a power. Look, every cop you've ever met is an A-type personality. They sometimes they go on power trips. I did it for 25 years. Can I say I never did that? Absolutely not. Sometimes
I appreciate that.
Sometimes I did that. And sometimes it was wrong, but it happens. But I say they wield a lot of authority, which puts you in a bad position, which puts maybe you, Sean, in a bad position because you see that authority that we hold or we wield. But I think there's maybe some disconnect between authority and power. And we have authority and we can do things, but that doesn't make them right.
No.
When in terms of your experience with the police, where you used to live, where you live now, can you explain a bit about sort of your own experiences?
So I grew up in New York City. I grew up in the 80s and 90s with stop and frisk. I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and with the stop and frisk law, which to me was the worst thing that could ever be passed down as a law. I was a good kid. I grew up in a poor neighborhood. I didn't choose to grow up in a poor neighborhood. My mom and dad came from Jamaica, third world country. They lived. That's where they had to live because that's where we could afford to live. We were good kids. With stop and frisk in action, if I was going late for school, a cop can stop me, tell me to empty my bags out, search me, frisk me for no reason. I could literally run down the street to get to the train station. Hey, stop, empty your bags out. Let's go through. Where you going? I'm going to school. Okay, let's see what's inside your bag and scan me and check me out for everything. To me, that's weird. Like I'm being policed to drop everything I'm doing because you guys want to search me.
Not a good program. I am not a fan of stop and frisk.
No.
Not at all.
And that's how we grew up. So you know, and it's like I said, authority. We had to respect that authority, because what can you do as a teenager going to school? If cop says, you know, 5 cops are at a table and you walk through the door and say, give us your bags, let's see what you have inside of it. Do you have drugs? Are you going in? Do you have a gun? That's, you know, that's scary. Did I have friends that had guns that were drug dealers? Yes, I grew up in a bad neighborhood. I wasn't part of that community. I didn't do anything with that, but that's the world we live in. And that's, to see me get stopped for something that I'm not doing, but because the community's bad, it's scary. And I moved away from that because I didn't like being the person that had to get stopped because I lived in a rough neighborhood. But then you go to a nice neighborhood, and, you know, right before I left New York, I lived in Bay Ridge, which was predominantly Italians and Arabic people. My brother would come to visit me. He drove a nice car. As soon as he came into the neighborhood, he would get stopped by cops because he was driving a nice car. He's a black guy. And they would say, you know, I'd say, hey, Brandon, what's taking you so long to get to the house? He's like, I got pulled over. Why? Across the street, I drove past the light, the cops saw me, the DTs pulled me over and, you know, searched the car. There's no reason to do that, but that's just there's no way to really escape that authority in a sense.
New York's a different animal. New York City and that whole metro area there they have some different rules up there. I don't agree with stop and frisk.
Yeah.
Stopping just because you're what we call in our business, we call it profiling. It's not acceptable. You can't do that. You have to have what we call probable cause. And if you don't have probable cause, did somebody run a stop sign?
Yeah.
And I don't mean didn't use a blinker.
Yeah.
Not using a blinker, that's not it's not a good thing. But if you're watching somebody, if you're doing surveillance on somebody and they don't use a blinker, well, that's good to stop and just to check.
Yeah.
But still, that's no reason to do that. I don't agree with stop and frisk whatsoever.
I mean, and Dallas, I live in Fort Worth, and I haven't really encountered anything. I got pulled over once, and I was coming home from an event, and I was driving down the street. I drive a nice car, and I saw a police officer in the parking lot, and as soon as I passed the police officer, I said, he's probably going to stop me. And he pulled out 3 cars behind me, and he got his way up to my car. I stopped at a light before I made a left to my house, and I was just waiting there. The light turned green. As soon as the light turned green, he threw the lights on. Okay, that's weird. I didn't do anything wrong. I was just driving down the street. So I pulled over into a parking lot, dropped all my windows, turned the car off. That's what I do. If I get pulled over by a cop, I drop every single window. I make sure that you can see inside my car. There's nothing for me to worry about or get scared. Turn my car off, put my cards in the dash, so I'm not going anywhere. There's no threat. I'm not going to start the car. I'm not going to move anywhere. And I asked him, why did I get stopped? He said, license registration, ran my numbers, and came back and said, yeah, you just have an expired registration. And I was like, you saw that from a parking lot and you pulled me from 3 cars over. That's weird. You know, so this one of those things where it's like, okay, cool. Where you going? My house down the street. Have a good day. Thank you for that. But that's one of the things that I'm used to that. It's like, okay, cool. I got pulled over because I was driving a nice car in my own neighborhood in Fort Worth, in a suburban neighborhood. Okay, cool. It's weird.
Greg, when he says that, and sorry, I promise you I'll come back. So when he says that, Greg, what do you think in terms of that happens a lot? That's how it works. That's
no, it happens a lot. It happens every day in every neighborhood in America. Though that very exact scenario that Sean just portrayed happens in America in every town throughout the United States. A lot of it is because you get a lot of younger officers who are trying to make their bones, and so they're stopping everything that moves. And again, it's a profiling issue that the young officers use in order to stop somebody like Sean, who has a very nice car, who's in a predominantly a wealthy area. They want to know why he's there. Well, that doesn't fly with me. You better have a reason why. And I always explain to rookies, new officers, because I trained for many years. You best know why you're stopping a car. I would have them in the car next to me. They go, hey, I'm going to stop that car. Well, why? Because I want to? No. There has to be a reason. Did you run the tag? If you ran the tag and it came back with an expired tag, or expired registration, then stop them, have a conversation about it. That doesn't mean you're going to write a ticket. Mm-hmm. I tell you, every traffic stop that I ever perform, if there was a way around writing a citation, I would do it. But if it came to things like reckless driving, reckless endangerment, DUI, things like that, I never passed on those ever. You got an expired tag, it's been expired for 2 weeks. You know, I'm not gonna, hey, look, man, you might want to go get that taken care of. Or I could say, here's a citation, but if you get it fixed by the time you come to court, which is usually 30 to 45 days out, and you show that you've made an effort to get this, we can just dead docket the case, and it makes it a lot simpler, and you get compliance that way. What we are looking for is not, and I don't mean physical compliance, we want compliance with the law in and of itself. John, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sonia, your perspective on this, because you are neither a Black man nor a police officer, but see things from your perspective. What is it that you see as the problem right now?
Well, certainly, I mean, Greg seems like a really stand-up cop. But if you look at the system, we can see that it's broken, right? I mean, that's so obvious right now with the protests, with the overrepresentation of Black and brown people in prisons, with with just the criminalization of Black and brown bodies, with just innocent Black and brown people who are killed regularly, as we see, for falling asleep in a Wendy's for being drunk. I mean, I realize he took the taser, and I think he was running away. I think from what I've heard, that just happened in Atlanta, and he was shot in the back, like, you know, this lethal force. We obviously, there's a call for reform, and just from my own personal perspectives, I grew up between DC and Baltimore. I went to undergrad in Baltimore County, and so just from a young age, I just started noticing that there was kind of a different set of rules for me than there were for my Black and brown friends, especially my Black male friends. There was a different set of rules. I started testing out very early with cops, like what I could get away with in college, and seeing that, like I said, especially my Black male friends, they could not get away with the things I could get away with. So I realized, you know, this was about 20 years ago, that there was definitely this white privilege that I was working with, you know, and I tested it hard, you know, I tested it probably too hard.
Can you tell me about that? Tell us about that. Tell us about that testing, like an example of what that would be.
Ooh, oh God, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to tell you too much, but, you know, basic dumb kid stuff. I, you know, got alcohol citations and parties and living in Ocean City, Maryland during the summer. And they sent the warrant to appear at course to the wrong address. I didn't appear. So I went to get arrested, and not only did they not arrest me, but I wound up being able to just get off on the whole thing because we knew the cop just from living in, you know, being in the community. This is a really excellent thing about people living in community, policing in their own communities, I think is really important, because you have to know the community, you have to build trust. And this police officer being very good friends with my boss at the time, you know, like these were, you know, like this is, you know, white privilege is real. You know, we can get away with a lot of things that Black and brown people cannot get away with in this culture. So we need reform. We need a whole host of series of things to happen. We need to move away from this antiquated, you know, the whole history of policing is rooted really in, you know, keeping, you know, in the South at least, it's rooted the history of keeping slaves, slave patrol, and then enforcing Black codes and Jim Crow. Like, this is the history of policing in the South. And in the North, it was really around the businesses needed order in order to have, you know, in order for the economy to be moving and for business to be working, you know, the vested interests needed order. And they also wanted to outsource their costs for security to public funds. So it was about creating order so that capitalism could move right along on the backs of Black and brown people and this underclass that has been created, and we can do so much better. You know, Langston Hughes said, you know, America was never America to me. Like we can be the home of the free and the land of the free, home of the brave, with a completely new set of structures that are, you know, that are funding public health and healthcare and education and mental health services, which get these tiny percentage of the budgets. And homelessness and all of these, you know, systems of social uplift, because we reap what we sow, right? We know that security does not come with force and violence. We can see that in all of the data and all of the stories, and we can build a different system. And the public is saying right now, we have to build a different system.
Well, Greg, let me get your thoughts on that. Obviously, it's a lot, but when someone says, first of all, I would like to say that Sonia is shady. Can we just all acknowledge that she does bad stuff and then uses personal connections to get off? So let's be clear about that Sonia is shady.
I am testing. That was research.
That was
white privilege research.
I want to do some of that research.
Yeah.
So that's the one. Two is, Greg, when someone says to you, the system is broken, how do you honestly feel about that from your perspective, having policed for so long?
Well, is the system broken? Not completely, but I will tell you that I agree with Sonia in a point that in two ways. One, you hear defund the police department. Well, they're not talking about getting rid of police departments. Right. They're talking about moving the money around, and it's all about the movement of money. Now, I will tell you that in several times throughout my career, I needed a social worker there to do his or her job as a social worker. The problem entails is that you, when you ask for somebody like that, if it's on a weekend or after hours, they're not showing up. And then when they do show up, they want you to try to take the action that they need to be taking. And so it's tough because they don't have the funds in order to pay. You have to pay these folks. You have to pay them to do their job, and they have to be there. So when you say defund, it's really react or moving money around so that you can get those services when they're needed at the time they're needed, so that everybody remains safe. Especially when you have somebody that has a mental defect, or they're having a mental episode of some kind. That is very hard to try to, for you, because you have to walk into and assess something in 15 seconds of what's going on, and then try to make the decision. Okay, what do we do here? And if you're not properly trained, I'm a cop. You know, I'm a knuckle dragging Neanderthal sometimes. You know, it is. We are what we are. Sometimes we're that way. We don't mean to be that way, and we become cynics over time, and that should probably not be, but it is factual. It happens. So reallocating money into services that can help people when they need it is very, very, very important. I will tell you that I am a proponent of actually increasing funds through the police department, but adding people like social workers and counselors and things like that to give the folks that are in your community the services they need.
When you say the money, tell me a bit about how, I think all of politics is ruined by the money, the fundraising. That, we're now in a real crisis. We have COVID. Everyone's angry. We'll spend about $300, $400, $500 million on an election that will be decided by a handful of percentage points. And everyone seems fine with that, even though we're in COVID and everyone's lost their $500 million will be spent. In terms of following the money in the police department, your police department, for example, where did you find that the structure as a police officer, you're like, that doesn't make sense? Or like in terms of how money gets allocated, how your next year's budget gets determined, when you follow the money, what are the issues that come up for you as a police officer?
Yeah, we don't have, one of the things that our city budget was somewhere in the neighborhood of $112, $113 million a year. It may be more than that now. The last budget that I saw for our police department, which is a what we call a mid-sized department, which is about 100 officers and probably 20 support staff or so, including a judge. It was about, like I said, it's about 11 and a half, $12 million.
Okay.
So a lot of that goes for salaries. We were at one time, the department that I worked in, were one of the highest paid departments in Metro Atlanta. I don't want to mention my city, but I will tell you that we're right close to the Atlanta airport. And so you can imagine the transient population that we have of people who move in and out of our city. Our nighttime population, people who actually lay their heads here, somewhere in the neighborhood of 13 and a half, 14,000. Our daytime population of people who move through our city can be upwards of 500,000 people. I mean, depending. In the Atlanta airport, there's an airplane that takes off every 40 seconds.
Yeah.
They either take off or land every 40 seconds in Atlanta when they're in full tilt. And you got to realize that in COVID, they're not. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people who move in and out of, and would move in and out of our city. So moving the money for us is different because we pay officers. We got 100 officers. You figure you're paying them. We start our officers out at somewhere around $47,000 a year. When you get to my level, I'm in the upper echelon of that now because just over time. But there were several years when I didn't get a raise. Nobody in the city got a raise. So it goes for benefits and things like that. So, but moving the money around is being able to have programs that we can help out and assist. Now, over the last few months, we have actually had a couple of social programs that have gotten put together by one of our chaplains, who is a community activist and our chaplain, and they go out and they do like food for the lunches for the kids at school who don't like I said, our median salary is probably just out or maybe even below poverty level. I mean, they're probably in the mid low 20s. Which is that is a tough time right there. So how do you move the money around? You're going to have to be able to take it from other services. So as in, you can't take the parks and recreation away because that's where the kids go. They are the key. Mm-hmm. They are the future. When I can't take care of, we can't take care of ourselves, our children are going to take care of us. They decide where we go and what we can do. So they are our future. So you have to invest in them. I used to go down to the school and read a storybook once a week. I'd go down there during lunch, or I'd sit with them and just have lunch, and we would chat and talk. And so those are some of the things I think are important.
Let me ask you a question about the realities of policing. That I think you had said that, when it comes to power trips, sometimes it happens, not often, but it does happen. The reality of policing areas that are predominantly Black, how does that impact officers over time in terms of their view of the community if someone is interacting with a specific segment I believe you got shot, didn't you?
I did. I was going to tell you that.
I think your brother told me, we know each other because I'm very good friends with Greg's brother. We work together. And so we've never met before, Greg and I, but he had mentioned to me that you had been shot. And so there are, in all of our dreams of what the police should be, there's the practicalities of policing and the danger level. So could you talk a bit about that? Because it doesn't get heard and it has to be taken into the equation for any real reform.
So how do you address, for me, I was shot twice back in 2017. It was Memorial Day weekend. It was 2:30 in the afternoon on a Saturday afternoon. And the kid that shot me he just didn't want to go to jail that day. One of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that when people run from the police, it's not that they don't want to get arrested. It's they don't want to get arrested right now. They got things to do. They're having dinner with their mama. They got to pick up their kids. They got to do this or they got to do. They have things to do. It's not that they don't want to get arrested. They just want to get arrested right now. I don't know that, and that is probably on the maybe just higher than the midpoint. I don't want to say it happens every single time. I was asked a couple of different times why I didn't have my gun pointed at this guy that shot me. If I did that on every encounter that I ever every person that I came in contact with, I would never put my gun back in the holster.
Mhm.
I mean, you can't do that. I simply went. I saw the guy. I was able to identify him inside of a restaurant, and I went to take him into custody, and I grabbed the wrong part of his body, and he pulled up a gun out of his pocket and shot me twice. So what's the reality of how do you get connected with your community? Sean, being from New York, I would ask you, how do you feel about the walking beat cops in town? I think those are great.
It was, I mean, I avoided them. I mean, to me, growing up, you just have to completely avoid them. Like if you just keep your head down, keep it moving, because you don't know who you're going to encounter. And that's the world I lived in. I have a lot of friends that became police officers after, as we got adults. And, they joined it because, like you said, they want to be part of a community. They want to help. They want to see, okay, what's happening in the department that we need to fix. I mean, my department, the neighborhood that I grew up in, we had some of the worst cases that happened in New York City. We had the guys that they weren't white. They were Latin guys and black guys, and they're the ones who assaulted the guy with a nightstick. That's not because of racism. That's because of authority. And they took him to a prison. They didn't like the way he spoke back to them, and they assaulted him.
They're just mean, and that's not.
Mean. And so as a 13-year-old kid, you hear that like, oh, this guy was an innocent guy. He went to jail. He was probably drinking or something, but on top of just going to jail, they abused him. I'm going to avoid you as much as I have to. Like if there's no need for me to interact with you, why would I cross that line? So I didn't really. If I saw an officer on beat, there was nothing for me. I'd either cross the street or keep my head down and just, because again, you could stop and frisk. I could say, "Where are you going? What are you doing? Where do you live?" Just completely avoid it and just cross the street. Just leave you alone, because I don't want to be, in a sense, bothered.
That's the reality disconnect, Riaz. Yeah. That's the reality disconnect right there. See, for me, I would stop. My trainees used to get mad at me because, oh, stop, wait a minute, hold on, I got to go talk to this guy over here. I'd pull up on somebody's porch and get a glass of tea, and we'd just sit and chat. Hey, what's going on today? What are you hearing about in the neighborhood? Or when I was walking in downtown, I'd go into all the shops. We have several different African braiding shops in our Main Street area, and I'd go in there, and the girls were like, oh, what's wrong? Why are you here? Why are you here? I'm just saying hi. Everybody okay? And so that and so, but we get that disconnect, just as Sean said, is he just put his head down and kept moving. But that's the reality of the disconnect. Why couldn't I, or that officer, go to Sean and go, hey man, what's going on? Hey, how's your day? What's going on? Or just something. Simple engagement of people make it work. And you have to be able to flip. You have to be able to see their side of it. And you can't just not know what people do every day. Beat cops know their neighborhood. Walking beat cops know every store owner and just about every resident in their beat. Especially in New York, their zones are only a couple of blocks wide. Now there's a lot of people in 2 blocks.
Yeah,
and they know everybody.
And so the thing with that, we didn't have a lot of we didn't have a lot of officers walking the beat. You had them in cars. You had a lot of DTs because, I mean, my apartment that I lived in, right? If my mom said, "Hey, Sean, go get milk from the store," I would have to pass by 2 sets of drug dealers to get to the corner store. So they're the guys who walk the beat where the drug dealers. They stayed on the corner, so you wouldn't see a cop car because all you see is a bunch of dudes on the corners, selling weed or crack, and that's who I was encountering. So if you saw a cop walking the street, you're like, why is there a cop in the neighborhood? Because you're not there because they're just walking the beat. They're there because they want to either clear the traffic or clear the street out for a little bit.
Right.
Again, I grew up in a really rough neighborhood, so you didn't see that engagement of let's see a cop saying hi to everybody. It was just like, okay, avoid you, or the drug dealers are in the corner. So that's the life we lived in.
Well, I will tell you that I've been to New York two times, and even as an officer, I would try to engage the officers in town. And of course, I'm a tourist, so I'm going to be in Manhattan. But they were not overly friendly to me, and I'm one of them. Yeah. So there's a disconnect within our own community somewhat.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, and this is not a question of what's inside of your heart, Greg. It's a question of going through the experiences that you went through, or other people that you went through, policing Black areas, seeing the amount of crime you see the amount of difficulty, being shot at. Do you see that there is a double standard for Black males than there is for other or white males in terms of the way they're seen. And again, we can discuss whether that's right or wrong or why that happens, but do you see it as a double standard that exists?
Yeah, and this is where I guess you talked about flipping and seeing the other perspective of it.
Yes.
Because I work in a heavily Black area, I had to do that. I had to do that. If I wasn't able to do that, I wouldn't have survived for 25 years. I would have been run off my own block. I actually live in the city that I work in. And where I live now, 10 years ago, well, not 10 years ago, 20 years ago when I first started, I wouldn't walk my block without a gun and 2 knives. Now I run regularly in my neighborhood in just a pair of shorts and tennis shoes. I mean, it's so. How does that happen? Does that change? Doesn't happen overnight. But how do I assimilate to the Black community? Again, I said at the beginning, I cannot understand ever in my life will I be able to understand what it feels like to be a Black man. It's just not going to happen. But can I try to, and I would never try to equalize us, because there is a disconnect in the community of, I'm trying to think of the right words to say. I talk with my hands, sorry. Because we work, because of such the heavy population. I stopped a guy one time and he said, all he had was his radio was playing loud. I went, hey man, I reached out my window and gave him my hand and said, well, turn your radio down. And he said, man, you just stopped me because I'm Black. I said, wait a minute, hold on. Let's do a little math here, guy. He said, well, okay. I said, we are an 87% thereabouts community. I'm a white cop of probably 50 or 60 on the police department. What are the odds that I'm probably going to stop somebody Black? He went, you know what, man, you're right. I said, well, can you turn your radio down? He said, sure. He turned it down. That's how you do it. Because then, later on, when I'm on the corner getting my butt kicked in a Wendy's parking lot or a McDonald's parking lot or in the grocery store parking lot, he goes, man, that guy helped me out one time. He showed me some love. Let's help. May not happen, but it could. So
I think what the double standard, like for example, totally getting that a cop act's job is to enact the law. If the law is saying a Black man is going to get much higher jail time and arrest for crack cocaine than a white person for cocaine, that's a systemic injustice that the policing will be. And as police officers, you're just enforcing what the law is telling you.
But that's part of the white privilege that Sonia was talking about. But it hits right on the head with that. Because, and it's simply most of the time when somebody is arrested for cocaine or marijuana in a heavy amount, they're usually in an area that, in my case, where in my city, it was usually a Black male. So if I saw a white guy in my neighborhood that I knew I'd never seen before, that's the guy I'm stopping. I'm not stopping the Black guy on the corner. I'm stopping the white guy this year because he's out of place. He doesn't belong here. Which one of these things don't belong? And he doesn't belong here. Now, the question becomes, when this guy gets to court, what happens to him? There is a very big disconnect in the judicial system of white males and Black males, because a Black male will probably get more time for a couple of reasons. One, he or she may not have an attorney, or they get a court-appointed attorney who is brand new, who doesn't know their tail from third base. They don't know, so they strike a deal. They play a deal. That's not the appropriate way to do this. If your case has merit, you defend the case, and that's not what happens in our in communities like that. Okay. And the second side of that is they would try to defend themselves, which if you're not trained in that, you don't know how to do that. You're going to make you look foolish, and we don't want that, because it's just because you're not articulate in the the vocabulary, which makes it very, very hard to do. So yes, is there some disparity? Absolutely, 100%.
Do you, from your perspective, do you feel like it's unfair?
Yeah, again, yes, because you have to go on the merits of the case. Did this person possess this, or possess a particular item, or I'm just going to say item. I don't know what it is. If it's marijuana, cocaine, crack, or heroin, whatever, methamphetamine, which is huge down here in the South now. So it's very disproportionate. Because I guess judges are trying to make, some of the judges are trying to make a point, saying, hey, we don't want you to do this again. But the reality of it is that if you put especially in our community, who is a majority of Black in jail, then what's the recidivism rate? Okay. The recidivism rate in an African-American neighborhood of young males, Black males that go to jail, the recidivism rate is over 70%. People don't understand that. So what again, I'll try to take the eye out of what can we do to stop that? How do we stop the cycle from continuing to do what it's doing to bring people to a different level so that this doesn't continue to happen?
Sonia, do you have any thoughts on this in terms of, I mean, we're talking about, realistic situations. None of us are expected to solve it, right. But there are facts. And I think, when everyone holds up their banner and says, defund the police, let's do this, no rubber bullets, announce before you shoot, a part of me is like, I don't know if those work in policing situations. Like, I don't have the expertise to say that. From your perspective, what do you think it is that could be done for this disconnect, this unfairness? What is it that you think needs to happen?
Well, I think just being clear, going to the root, like there is no cycle of poverty, it's the creation of poverty. Poverty has been created. There isn't a cycle of poverty. That it's been created over centuries by Black and brown people not being able to accumulate wealth. And when they have been able to do that, it's been taken from them, and there's many examples to talk about this. You look at the USDA, these Black and brown people have been completely dispossessed of property throughout our history. This has happened up until recently, the discrimination against the USDA with, Black farmers not being able to get the loans that they need to do their work. So there's this root of the problem that is this very systematic dispossession of wealth and property in communities, redlining everything, every single sector, you name it. Education based on property values, of course, is going to be underfunded in communities where property values are lower than in there's just, it's hard to look at one system without looking at the intersection of all the systems, I think, which is the best way to attack some of the solutions. And when there are these, under Obama, there was a task force that was looking at these 21st century policing. There's a document online that you can look at that has all these pillars for how policing should evolve. There's 7 pillars?
There's 7
awesome.
pillars.
Awesome. Thank you. So there are really, way smarter people than me that have been working on this and analyzing this and have come up with these pillars and have, and in our culture as a whole, we need to divest in these, colonizer systems that are violent and destructive, with both people and the planet. There are these divestment movements happening, right? To divest the things that are violent and oppressive in our cultures, and to invest in things that are going to uplift people and the planet. So we could keep going down this road of, you know, militarizing a force of people that, I mean, I think again, the people are speaking now and saying this is not the way of the future, right? Like militarizing, continuing to spend a huge amount of our budget and on our national military, and then militarizing our police forces isn't making us safer. These things are not making us safer, and any of us, especially Black and brown communities. So how do we demilitarize? How do we have, much you were saying, Greg, that you do these training, you do these de-escalation trainings. So more of those trainings, more training around race, racism, and whiteness and racial justice. You know, these are, and like we're right, you know, everybody's talking right now, and that's a really good thing. People are really starting to unpack the complexities of these issues and talking to each other. This right here is an amazing example of that. And then, more public oversight, more, like you said, police officers living in the communities, policing the communities that we live in. So building solidarity. There's an example I think in Camden, New Jersey, where they just flat out got rid of the police force totally because it was so corrupt. They were like planting evidence, you know, and I mean, it was hideous. And it's not perfect. The crime rates went down by 50%. And there you can look at that case study online and see kind of what's working and what hasn't been working. But again, we reap what we sow. And if we invest in, you know, great mental health and health care and fantastic education for everybody, and really integrating, you know, communities again, which have become so still resegregated again since Brown v. Board of Education. And that was one of the things I wanted to say, but I forgot it now. Integrating, so like all of these things coming together are going to having all, you know, these opportunities, healthcare, childcare, you know, all of these things are going to just reduce crime in general. You know, like if you have no other options but selling your body or selling crack, you know, or those are your options, you know. I mean, everyone talks about personal responsibility, but you know, think about live in somebody else's shoes for a second. When you don't have many choices, I mean, we need shifts in all of the systems in order for this system and all of the systems together.
Greg, when we talk about Camden, what do you think of what happened in Camden?
You know, Camden was a great example. I just read an article on Camden the other day when all this defunding the narrative started coming out. I started looking into it, and I was like, wow. 50% drop in crime rate. That is incredible. And they just did away with the police department. They didn't do away with the police department. What they did was unfunded. They defunded it, and they actually defunded it. It went away, and they built it from the ground up the way that community needed to be built. And that's why they got a 50% drop in a crime rate. But because they built it for them. They were still operating on the old school way, not the way it was now. So they had to be able to get into the community, and the only way to do that was to wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And that's what they did, and it worked.
When people talk about systemic racism, what do you think about that, Greg? Honestly. Yeah,
it's systemic. I'm really on the fence about systemic racism. Does racism exist? 110%, absolutely it does. Systemic, I would only agree with that to a certain degree. Systemic being, it's hard for me to really to explain this in a way that's going to make sense. The systems are not set up in favor of a young black male, just like we just talked about. Systemically, when a young black male comes into the courtroom or in my particular jurisdiction, they're probably going to get judged pretty hard just simply because they are a young black male.
I appreciate you saying that, because even that is something that I think in this moment people don't believe is true. So I really appreciate you acknowledging that.
It happens every day, and in every courtroom across America. It's not just in my city. It happens in every single city in America today. It happens. So again, how do we fix the systematic problem? Is we start getting out there. We start making. We don't necessarily have to be friends, but we can be allies so that we can make our community better. And that is the root of it all.
And what are the parts of systemic that you have a hard time understanding or getting on board with? Because you're not the only one, and that's why we have these conversations. What are the parts of the systemic that make the least sense to you? I honestly want to know, because this is why we're bridging the gap, because we don't get to have these conversations productively.
Why don't, well, let's see, Sonia hit on it a minute ago talking about the reason why police patrols were set up. And I didn't understand it until it happened, until I had a very honest conversation with a former partner of mine who now is no longer a police officer. He is a black male, but he and I became friends over time when he first came there, and we had a very honest conversation about police patrols. And he said to me, what you said, Sonia, was, do you know the reason why police patrols are set up anyway? They were to try to control black men within the community. And I said, really? Are you kidding? Are you serious about that? And he said, yeah. So I started doing a little research, and it's absolutely true. I mean, not totally, but in and of itself, the basis of it is absolutely 100% true. So systemically, how do we fix the problem? It's an overview. It's the totality of all the systems in and of themselves do not lend any advantage to a young black, or just say young or middle-aged black man. It just doesn't happen. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but it is bad. So how do we fix it? I want to be able to understand it so that I can stop it. I grew up and started going to school in the 70s when desegregation happened, as Sonia mentioned just a second ago. But I never remember not going to school with black kids. We were just people just like me. And my mom would tell me that. I don't know if you've met my mother before, but she would say, they're just people. I said, well, what do you mean? And she'd say, they're just people. They're human beings, just like you. You treat them just like you would treat your brothers. And so that's what I basically tried to do my whole career. Again, sometimes do you lose control or get the big head? Sure, it happens. And I'm not proud of it, but it happens. It happens in every police department. Every officer sooner or later is going to lose his cool.
What can we do about that? Because let's say for Sean, that's a great example. Sometimes when I have conversations with people and they're like, it's a few bad apples, or however they say it, doesn't matter. The problem is, from Sean's perspective, if he decides to go for a run when visiting a friend, he doesn't know that police force. He doesn't know those police officers. He doesn't know who's going to have a bad day. You could be anywhere in the country. You could be anywhere, and it could be that person's that bad day. None of us knew there was a rampant problem in Minneapolis until recently. None of us, like Sean could have visited a cousin in Minneapolis. I didn't know that was a problem. So they never know when that day is going to happen. What could we do and put in place, whether it's therapy every so often or de-escalate, to get someone so that they don't have to click that way? Because they will. How can they not in the realities of the day-to-day?
It's up to the office. It's up to the individual officer. Sean, I think you would agree that it's up to the individual officers to make the effort to not do what's been systematically done over time. So let's just say Sean's running through a neighborhood. Well, is Sean running through the neighborhood in jeans and a button-down shirt, or is he running through a neighborhood in shorts or sweatpants and tennis shoes? So, and to me, that makes a difference. Okay,
Isn't that funny? But isn't that funny? Like when we stop and think about that, like let's say Sean's running for a bus and he's like, sorry, Sean, it's if you're not here. Let's say Sean is like going for an interview. He's running for a bus. So it's like, but isn't it interesting? And I'm saying, when you're saying this, it is coming from years of experience, Greg. It's not me judging or questioning what's in your heart.
Sure.
That when what Sean is wearing at a moment, if he seems like he stands out, is what we're saying is Sean is being scrutinized more than anyone else. And so what I'm hoping in terms of systemic is, what could we offer beyond just the individual officer's self-control? What could be offered or put in place that could help officers who may not think that they're about to snap, who may not think that they have rage issues? What could be put in place that could help them? Because it's very hard to be aware of your own.
How about accountability? You know,
I would agree.
Nobody has, like, finally, we're starting to see cops get charged for murder. Finally, after so many decades of no accountability for cops who shoot, you know, innocent people.
So I will tell you that one of the things I think will or could help this issue in and of itself is specific mandated counseling for officers, mandated training for officers. I will tell you, again, you don't know where I work, so I'm not going to put them on blast. When I was shot, I didn't have to go see a shrink. I went and spoke to my own clergy, to my own minister, but I was not mandated to go see anyone.
That's
now,
scary.
I reached out on my own.
That's scary because you can be the person that from that point on, you just say every black cat stop, I can react in the way I react because you did. You have PTSD. You got shot.
Right.
I can't imagine getting shot. So for you to not get any kind of counseling, that's
part of the problem.
Right.
Yeah, you could snap from that, and then your snapping could lead to somebody else getting pulled over for just running in sneakers and jeans. You know,
right. And it happened to me my very first day back on duty, back on the street. They gave me a trainee. Now, I will tell you that this trainee was not a brand new trainee. He actually came from a bigger jurisdiction within Atlanta, and so he had a little bit of experience. And the first call we got was a verbal dispute in an apartment complex in one of our pretty heavily crimed areas. And as soon as we pulled up, he saw it. He said, "Hey, Greg, he's trying to hide a gun. He's trying to hide a gun." I said, "Nah." We got out and I drew down on him and I was yelling at him, "Man, you let me see your hands right now. You know, I was PTSD. I mean, it really was." And the guys looked at, now my partner was black, and they looked at him like, man, he said, "Man, this brother's on edge. You might want to do what he tells you to do." And they did it. Now here's the kicker to that whole deal is I pulled a fully locked and loaded Springfield 45 out between the seats. The guy was trying to hide. That was 3 weeks, and about 3 to 5 weeks after I was shot. So am I on edge? Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. And so did I have a little PTSD? Sure. Because because I never saw a counselor. I never was mandated to go see a psychologist, anything like that. I reached out to people on my own because I knew I needed an outlet and I had to let it go.
Sean, Sonia, what do you think of that? I'm shocked. I'm utterly shocked that a police officer could be shot. And in terms of rehabilitating him physically, mentally to go back to the front line, there is no mandated anything. Sonia, Sean, your thoughts?
Well, certainly not like Law and Order, where people they're always taking their time to come back from trauma. Wow, that is totally shocking to me. And yes, studies show that mistakes happen. There's literally kind of a different reality that happens, that slows down when, military personnel and cops and people who are in those situations a lot, reality is distorted so that you do think your life is in danger when in fact it is not. It is a person reaching for their cell phone or something completely innocent. So there is this psychological thing that is happening in these scenarios. And in a way, I'm also not, you would think a police force would have these things in place, but our entire culture stuff is just kind of stuffing down our traumas, and there isn't enough mental health services across the board in our culture, and we're all just kind of like keep going, and oh, I gotta keep working, I gotta pay the rent, I got daycare, we just like have to just keep going because it's it's tough, life is hard, we gotta pay the bills, and we don't have the capacity or the resources or the affordable services to deal with our traumas.
Or the belief that it's that important.
Right.
Because if you had pain in your abdomen for 3 days, you would go to a doctor, insurance would figure out a way. Well, insurance, well, it's a different question, but ideally insurance would help you pay for it. Your work would be like, we get it. It's the priority of importance. Hang on, there are 2 small creatures around my feet asking about YouTube. Hang on, what's okay,
So
hang on 1
sweet.
second. YouTube on the iPad is not working, so we need to fix this right now. And then Sean, I'm going to ask
very
you,
important.
That's a problem.
if you have no one else to talk to and your YouTube's gone,
Yeah.
what are you going to do?
Yeah.
I do think all therapists really need to be trained in this racially informed traumas too, sorry.
Hold on, wait a minute.
You can't have the good conversation when I'm doing YouTube. Wait.
Okay.
Stay with that thought. Hang on.
Come out.
No one says anything. No one says anything.
Oh.
Okay. So Sonia, let's pick up exactly. Sorry, what you were saying. That every therapist.
Yeah, the therapists are trained in racially informed trauma too, which is a whole other layer of trauma that Black and Brown have experienced over generations, that have just, there's, the case to be made for these, the epigenetics and Native American people too, that there's traumas that are in our bodies, like when we're born, it's, Black and Brown mothers have these stress hormones even more so than other mothers. And so there are these generations of trauma that have built up. And then the traumas of just daily living in a white supremacist, white dominant culture, of living like in fear constantly for your life or for your children's life. Imagine having to have that I have a child, a white boy, and I can't imagine having to have a talk with him someday about how he needs to behave around cops that he has thought his whole young life that are there to serve and protect and help us, like just layers and layers of trauma. And we have to do better with mental health services in this country on many levels. And Greg, I'm really glad you were able to reach out and ask for the help that you needed.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was a tough deal, but I will tell you that you talked about, one of the things my friend and I talked about is about when we were growing up, when during the summertime, what would we go do? And I would say, hey, me and my brothers and all my buddies, we would take off. We'd get on our bikes and we would just go. We'd be gone all day. And as long as we came home before dark, Mom always said be home before dark. Probably Sean in your city and in New York probably said be home before the street lights came on, right?
Oh, we were out. I mean, we were out.
but again, he made the assimilation to me is that I never had to worry about cops stopping me, asking me what I was doing. You did.
Oh yeah.
That is the systemic problem. I never had to worry about that. I was more scared of my mama than I was the police. I promise you. She's 5'3" and got a right cross come out of South Florida, buddy. I promise it'll hurt. But again, my mother never had to have that conversation with me that I'm sure your mom had to have with you, Sean. I never had, hey, watch out with the police. There's some bad cops out there. You got to be careful. Those guys are going to do bad things.
But so my mom didn't grow up telling me watch out for cops. I don't understand. To me, I don't understand that fear of I didn't have parents that told me be scared of cops. I was never taught to be scared of a police officer. I learned from experience to avoid them. But my mom said, at the end of the day, our authority. So if something would happen to me in my house right now, I would call the cops.
Right.
I'm going to defend myself as best I can because I have a license to carry. but I'm gonna still call the police officer. So I don't have this fear of, I'm not gonna teach my daughter, hey, be afraid of cops. I learned from my own experience about, okay, I'm gonna avoid them because I am a black guy, and what they're gonna look at me like I'm suspicious of doing something wrong that I'm not doing. So I just avoid. My mom didn't tell me, hey, watch out for them. They're bad. There's bad people. I didn't know what a bad cop was from my parents. And I think that's what a lot of kids are hearing that now. It's like all cops are bad. I don't ever want that. I don't want my kids to ever hear that feeling that all cops are bad, because they're not all bad.
Right. That's what he explained to me as about part of the white privilege is that we never had to have that conversation, and most families apparently not as much as you, but the conversations had to happen in families. In Black communities, it had to happen every day. It never happened at my house, and so that was part of the white privilege. That's the way he explained white privilege to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So,
and see, I mean, I guess come from New York City is a different breed, because I wasn't taught that all cops, because it's a white cop, they're bad cops. So I didn't understand. Again, I didn't grow up in the mentality of like, hey, watch out for cops because they're bad and they're going to pick on you. It wasn't that. It was my own experiences that I'm going to avoid cops. So I don't like the idea of telling a kid, hey, you got to be careful because it's cops, they're gonna pick on you because you're black. That's not how. I don't want my kid to learn from that experience of me passing that fear down onto her. Mm-hmm. That's not healthy for her or for us, because then she's gonna have that mentality where, ooh, cops, I don't like them, they don't like me, they're gonna target me. My kid's mixed, so you can't really tell. But at the end of the day, I don't want her growing up with that repression where it's like, oh my God, there's a cop coming, I'm gonna avoid them. Right. Learn from your own experiences. I learned because of where I grew up. We live in a suburban neighborhood. She's not gonna have the same life experiences that I'm going to have. Hopefully she doesn't get that, because I bettered myself to get out of that situation. My personal responsibility was to say, hey, how can I get out of this where I'm not a target, or if I have a family, they're not a target. My personal responsibility was, don't do drugs, don't do anything bad, don't sell drugs, don't commit, get out of there. And that's what I did. And I think that's a lot of people don't have that personal responsibility, because I could have went the wrong way a lot of times. I have a lot of friends that, in high school, New York City, kids would come to school with guns. You can't have a gun in New York City. You can't have a gun as a kid. But kids came to school with guns, and it's like, hey, you want to hold it? And you're like, I'm just going to go the other direction. And that was my own personal responsibility. And I think a lot of people forget that as well, that you do need your own personal responsibility to say, hey, I don't have to go down that way. I don't have to go for the fast money. I could have sold drugs. I had offers until I was 20. That's why I left New York City. People were like, hey, I can get a brick of cocaine. We could split it up, and we could go to NYU, go to the white school, and sell drugs to white kids, and we can make a quick $2,000. I could have said, you know what, $2,000 at 20 years old, sure, I could do that, but personal responsibility on my own behalf would say, I'm not going to go down that route. I'm going to make sure I stay clean and still avoid everything, and avoid any issues or conflicts.
And I had a conversation with a friend of mine, the same friend of mine, and I said something to him. I'm not going to say what we were talking about, but he said, I said, he said something, he made a statement to me, I made a statement back to him, and he goes, if you said that around in a room full of black guys, you're going to get punched in the face. So I was like, ooh, okay. So that's the honest conversation that we could have had, that we were able to have. And I was like, well, okay, now I learned something. I learned that that's not nothing you would say. And it wasn't racially, it wasn't a racial slur or anything like that, but it was a point of view of the way I, and not necessarily the way I saw it, but it's a perspective that I had. And he goes, man, don't say that. You're going to get punched in the face if you ever say that in a room full of black guys. I'm like, well, okay, I better not say that. So being understanding that and is phenomenal. So.
I think there's a real problem when we are looking at the situation now and labeling all cops as bad. And, you can see the rage coming out and like looking at your life experiences and, the fact you've taken hits for your career. I mean, it's hard not to say thank you for what you do. What I appreciate is that you said it's impossible not to have it impact you from time to time mentally. Absolutely. And I think what I'm utterly shocked about is that there was no resources provided for you at all. And that to me is a very clear example of something that could be done better. In terms of the disconnect between police and, let's say, Black men, the issues, Sean, is there anything else that you would wanted to ask or bring up that's more specific to what your point of view is? Because it's here we are, an hour or so into conversation between a Georgia white cop who polices, in black areas, and you, like, why not ask whatever comes to mind? Is there anything else that comes up that you would want to ask about, or a point of view you just want to express, make sure it gets heard?
No, I think, like I said, having a conversation is key. I'm glad that we had this conversation. I'm glad that we spoke, because I don't ever want to go into a meeting and saying, hey, you're a cop, I'm going to attack you. And I think that's a lot of people are scared that, when you have a conversation with a police officer, you're like, hey, let's attack this cop and let's make sure he gets our point across. Yes, there's situations that I know I've come across all on my line, but like you said, you're gonna come across a cop, even knowing he's gonna have a bad day. My thing is, like I said, when we get to the point of defunding police officers, if you defund police officers, they're not gonna get that mental health that they need. If you take away the money that, like you said, you had $12 million, you said, for your department. If you defund that, who's gonna pay, besides paying your salary, who's gonna take care of you for your therapy needs? And I think there's a bigger argument where what is defunding going to do for the police department? Because you're clearly not going to get the help that you need if you get rid of more money, if you can't cover salary. I don't know. It's a good conversation. I'm all over the place. I'm writing so many notes. I'm like, okay. I think.
What if it's not defund? And again, this is the collaboration part of the combination. We're making stuff up. Like we're spitballing here, because now we all generally, I don't think we're on opposite sides. It doesn't feel like the four of us are arguing opposite things. So collaboration, what could we do? If we're talking about defunding, is there a need for another option? I have 911 and someone says, do you need police or mental health help? Please the police, or please the mental health. Do we need that? Do we need an option B that we can call that specializes in this? Greg, in your experience policing, what do you think is needed?
We have a thing called, I said it earlier, called CIT, which is called Crisis Intervention Training.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a 40-hour class that you go to learn how to determine the mental capacity of a subject, no matter what their demographic is. You learn how to deal with that. And you use things, like I said just a minute ago, about taking I out of it. We use what are called I statements. I see you're having a problem. I see that you need help. What can I do to help you? Kind of lead them down a path to where they want to go, or where you think they may need to go to get compliance. So what happens after the fact? Once I've got them where I need them to be, or where I want them to go, what other professional can I hand them off to get the help they need? That's the part where the money needs to come in at another level. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's more training, like you said. I agree with your statement. I think, to me, it's more training, because I think we have a lot of young cops. I mean, Giuliani did that when he first became mayor of New York City. They just wanted more bodies on the street, but you're just literally just getting people and just promoting them and graduating them and saying, hey, get on the street, get on the street, get on the street. And that's not really training to me. It's like, here's your authority. You have a gun, you have a badge. Now you're a cop. Go out there. But there's more. I think there's more training needed to interact with people, because at the end of the day, we're all humans, and you're gonna make that mistake where I'm gonna have a bad day. We all blow up. I blow up right now. I can blow up. But with your authority, I think more training needs to be had, where it's like, okay, I'm supposed to be here to protect, not to police in the sense of like, show you my power, show you my authority. And I always think there needs to be more training. I think, like you said, you have a lot of rookie cops that come out there and they said, I'm just gonna pull the guy over. Why? What's your point? Like, is that really doing anything to help? Is he doing anything wrong or unlawful? That's not really policing. You're just being a cop to some extent in a bad way.
So you talk about relevance. I retired in December. I did 28 years, and I got credit for a couple more years from my military time. But you think back about over time, how does that equate? How do you take all of your experiences and remain relevant after a guy like me has been through some of the things I've been through? How do you remain relevant to help the community get to the next level? And that's very difficult. That's why you see a lot of police officers who retire. They don't go to work anywhere else. They themselves fall into drugs or prescription drugs or alcoholism. Suicide rates, they're all high in our line of work. I will tell you, and Sonia mentioned it, and I appreciate it, is that if I had not been as strong mentally as I was at the time, I would have fallen apart had I not reached out. And so that is tough. But remaining relevant in the conversation, even after you're not doing it anymore. I've been out of this game for 6 months, and I still crave going on the street and just simply talking to people. I miss the human contact. That's tough.
That's my last sort of topic, and then we'll wrap it up, is the culture of police officers. Do you feel like inherently, either it's in the training or in the field, this becomes, do you find that it's hard for cops to be able to be tough on other cops, saying this is pointing out problems, bringing them to light? Is there inherently within police structures a unspoken code?
It's called the thin blue line.
Mm-hmm.
It happens every single day. In my career, over 25 years, I had to arrest 2 police officers. I'm not proud of that, but it is a fact. And I told one of those guys that I will give you every courtesy that I can, but I will not do my job. Mm-hmm. And he ended up having to be arrested. And that was the second one. The first one I did ended up getting through it. He was a very young guy on a local area. He got past it and continued policing, as far as I know, and moved on through his career. But it's called the thin blue line, and it's there for a reason. We don't want to tattle. We don't want to tattle on our own. It's just like you and your family. If you've got many brothers and sisters, I can mess with my brother, but you better not. It's kind of that whole sentiment that way. But it's an unwritten code. It's called, again, now I subscribe to some of the thin blue line because that line is very thin, but we are in its most basic form. I don't want to generalize anything. In its most basic form, the line between civilization and anarchy. I mean, it is a very small percentage, or very small. It is a very thin line, and there are laws that are in place that somebody has to enforce those laws, and that's the guys like me, or some are not like me, who've made that conscious decision to do that. But is there a I hate to say it but it's the good old boy system. Yeah, it happens. And it happens not just in Georgia, not just in the South. It happens in New York. It happens in LA. It happens in Seattle. It happens in Chicago. It's kind of like what's that from the Untouchables? We're going to do it the Chicago way. Mm-hmm. That's how they got stuff. That's how things got done. Is it the right way? No, not always. Sometimes, that it may work to the advantage. Sometimes it may not.
Do you think that line might be able to be blurred after this? Meaning that with this level of scrutiny, outrage, do you think that it's a moment where a police department could say, I get the thin blue line and I understand why it exists, but we may have to, in order to move us as a police department to the next level, we have to be tough on ourselves and each other to get there, to get the trust? Because it seems like the thin blue line is a very big part of the lack of trust. That if the community feels you'll protect your own at my expense, they're going to keep that distance.
Absolutely. And I will tell you that you're absolutely right. One of the things that I wrote a note down here was what's going on right now is pure lawlessness. And it's the lawlessness of not, and I'm not going to say of the Black community, of people right now. It is in Seattle and Louisville and Minneapolis. There is pure lawlessness going on now. Is there a reason for protest and to be outraged? Absolutely. So how do we balance enforcing the law with you being not being able to take away your First Amendment and Fourth Amendment rights? because I don't want to do that. I want you to be able to tell your story. I want you to be able to be just mad about it. I want you to be upset about it. If something bad happens, you should be able to have the right to do that. But at the same time, so do we just let it happen just because somebody's mad at the cops? I'm not so sure that's a solution.
You're talking about the laws.
They burned down a restaurant. They burned down a restaurant. And that ain't the only place. What is it, Minneapolis? Was it in Minneapolis where they cordoned off like 5 or 6 blocks and won't even be able to get to the police department?
Well, that's Seattle's doing that.
Is that Seattle? Yeah. I didn't know where I knew it happened, but I will tell you as a police officer and as if I were a chief, it wouldn't happen in my city. Not in my station. We spend more time at work than we do at home. And those guys spend a lot of time together. That is their second home. How can you stop me from getting to my police station? I would not be able to stand idly by and watch that happen.
I think that's where the message is getting lost, though, because that's not the people that are protesting. That's not the people that are up in arms right now. People that are doing that are looters and anarchists, like you said. So that's where the message is lost in that. With the thin blue line, I think what, like Riyadh said, I think the fourth officer, who was a rookie cop, he's a new cop, and he's going to get charged in that trial in Minneapolis because he just sat on the side. But that's where the thin blue line is like, okay, I respect that we're all in this together, but you saw something happening wrong, then you should have stepped up. And even though you're a rookie and you saw these guys doing something wrong, that's when you say, hey guys, ease up or something like that. And I think that's what you said with the thin blue line. Like, how do you stop that? Because I get that your buddy, your boys, and cool, but when you're seeing something wrong being done, then that's when you should drop that thin blue line and say, hey, ease up, or let's get his knee off his neck, or stop being so aggressive.
And it sounds like they are implementing some of those policies now too, where fellow officers have to intervene, or they could have consequences also. So they're seeing. Am I right, Greg? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say yes. There was just today, I saw it on the news today. There was a Buffalo, New York police officer that was fired for stopping another. It just, because of our conversation, it was a black female police officer stopped a white guy from using a chokehold. She got fired. Why?
So she broke the code, and that's scary.
Isn't it though? She did the right thing, but she just sacrificed everything she had worked for up to that point, because she broke the code. She knew it was wrong. I know it. I saw it today and I was outraged. I was like, why did they fire her? She did the right thing. Yeah, and they teach us, people the knee and the neck thing. They teach us there's one technique that we use that is very similar to that, but your knee is supposed to go into the back, not into the neck, and that sometimes that gets confused. Now, I've said it before in our training. We talk about if you're talking, you're breathing. You hear a lot of people say, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe." Well, if you're talking, you're breathing. That's the reason why they have cadence in the military when you're running, because that helps you breathe, helps you get air in and push air out. What this guy in Minneapolis, without getting too far off on a tangent, was not necessarily a chokehold, but what he did was like a sleeper hold, and it ended up killing Floyd. Bad juju all day long. And I will tell you that watching the videos and seeing what happened there, his laissez-faire, nonchalant attitude about it, hand in the pocket, just sitting there. That ain't the first time he's done that. He's done that many times before, I promise you. And that guy's going to go to prison for a very, very long time, as he should.
I really do think, do you feel like we're at a tipping point of that thin blue line may have to be relaxed for the trust to come back? It's almost like that thin blue line is the thing that's helping, that's keeping the trust away, because then there's no recourse. Tell me.
I'm on the fence about that. I think that there still can be a thin blue line, but there has to be accountability. As Sonia said, Sonia said it a minute ago, accountability is the key here. If you as a supervisor and as a leader inside of a police department hold your officers accountable for the things that they do, whether they're seen or not seen, that's the reason why we have body cam. That's the reason why we have in-car video. Those things, when those are reviewed as a supervisor, I had to review those. I had to randomly review those things. And I saw things in there. I'd say, all right, come in here, have a seat. Let's talk about this. All right, well, look, now I'm mandating you to go to training, or I'm sending you up to the next chain of command for possible actions. You got to be ready for it. So it's making sure that the leadership recognize that there is a problem and dealing with it at that level so that it stops. I still think that the thin blue line right now is, as you said, is very skewed right now. But I think that it can be rebuilt with trust as long as the leaders are holding their officers accountable.
I believe that.
You agree with that, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I've seen, going from years, I've seen, the Sean Bell case where, and it was the thin blue line. We had to divide in the city where, unarmed black guys leaving a bachelor party, and, 4 unidentified cops jump out of their car. He doesn't know what it is. He lives in a rough neighborhood, so he moves, and they told him not to move, and they shoot up his car. He dies. But then you see everybody's on the left, on one side is saying, well, the cops are right for doing what they're doing, and accountability is what you said is key, because when you stop saying, oh, well, he's a cop, so I'm going to defend him because he's a cop, no one right or wrong, that's when, okay, people are going to have that fear. People are going to say, okay, I'm going to step back. And that thin blue line, again, with the lady that you said just got fired, she got fired for doing her job, but that's not changing anything, because she shouldn't be fired right now in this time, but she still got fired. So that's scary. That means that thin blue line it's not really doing anything for her. She stepped up against it, and they said, yeah, you're fired. Get out of here. You're not part of the team. That needs to get skewed more than if a person after today got fired. That's scary that she lost her job in this day and age, where you're saying, hey, we need some more accountability, but we're going to fire a person that actually did see something being done correctly, and we got rid of her. That's not trust. I'm not going to have trust right away still, because you fired somebody today.
Yeah. There's an activist. He is an attorney and a civil rights activist here in the Atlanta area, and he was on the news the other day as a I guess talking head, for the news cycle, and he said personally, we were talking about the case in Atlanta at the Wendy's. That's what they were talking about, and they said that he said in the news report that personally, I think it was 100% completely wrong. Legally, the officer's probably going to be found the shooter's probably going to be found justified. Now, this is a very well-known civil rights activist attorney in Atlanta saying this. So that's a tough pill. How do you, if he is who he is, and has the esteem that he has, and so are people going to listen to him and let the officer do what he does, or do what he did, or are we going to just crucify the officer when there are several different sets of circumstances?
And he's saying that based on the evidence?
He would say that based on the evidence. He said, personally, I don't like it. Based on the evidence that I see, this is what I think. I thought it was pretty brave of him.
As long as there's some due process.
Yes.
As long as there's some open due process to say something was reviewed, this is what we thought, and this is why. I think that's key, and I hear what you're saying about the thin blue line. I cannot fathom a profession that requires me to take my life into my hands every day. So I do understand that between you co-working in this space, there are going to be loyalty, and I understand that. I really do. But I do think that what that thin blue line is may have to shift, not go away, but might have to shift.
Disagree with that. I would not disagree with that completely.
Okay. So let's wrap it up. Let me ask you each, when did you shift chairs? At what point did someone say something that you're like, oh, I didn't know that, I hadn't seen that from that perspective? Because that's the point of why we do this. I'm going to start with you, Sean.
I think after Greg explained, being shot and the situation that he was in.
Yeah, me too.
you know, just I didn't expect that story. Like, I got shot, and then 3 weeks later, you know, a guy, you know, again, put myself in your shoes. I would have reacted the same way you reacted, and knowing that you said you didn't have any therapy or anything go after that, yeah, you're gonna be on edge. So I think putting myself in your shoes is like, okay, I understand why you reacted the way you reacted, and you know, the guy had a gun on him, so you were adjusting, doing what you were doing. And again, that's not me questioning what you're doing, but I think I put myself in your shoes when it's like, okay, I got shot at, and I still went out there on the force without any therapy and did my job. And you didn't go in the sense of like, I'm gonna judge every Black person that you encounter as somebody's going to shoot me. Because you could have done that. I mean, if I would have I've never been shot. If I would have got shot, I don't think I would go back to work, let alone be safe to trust anybody on the street, because I'm going to lose that trust effort. And put myself in your shoes and saying, okay, wow, put myself in your chair. That was a great, you know, the way you handle yourself and just how you went through the situation.
All right. Thank you.
Sonia?
Yeah. But before I do this closing round, I wanted to just push back on one thing that Greg said around kind of this lawlessness and civilization without you know, civilization versus anarchy. I just wanted to push back on that a little bit. Just looking at the history of our country and how, you know, laws can be unjust and need to be changed. So we cannot enforce unjust laws. There are just some things at the policy level that are going to need to change. And then there are examples all over the world of, you know, police forces didn't start, you know, municipal police forces didn't really start till the 1830s. So it's, you know, relatively new invention in the history of humankind. So, and if we also look at, you know, places around the world that have very, there are police officers kill, you know, more people in a few days in the US than they do in years in other countries around the world. So we live in an extremely violent country compared when you look at other systems where, you know, things aren't so militarized and the gun laws are stricter and not anybody can get guns. And so I think we need to be more imaginative about what a society can look like that invests in different things than what the U.S. has been investing in. But I hear you about, you know, I think we do need people who are protecting and serving and showing up to deal with, you know, armed conflict. You know, a lot of people, you know, our whole society is armed up, you know, like that is a major issue. Then we're here. Like that's not going to change anytime soon. So there obviously needs to be a force that is protecting, but there also needs to be investment in the uplift of our society, and we can't continue to go down this militarization road. You know, we've been there and we see what comes of that. I just wanted to push back a little bit because there are other societies that are doing it. And yeah, I really appreciate Greg's candor. I think that you are obviously very open, you know, and you obviously really care about the communities that you're working in. And you're obviously trying to hear and see a different perspective. I kind of had the stereotype in my head of who you might be, and you were not that. And I always try to approach everybody with compassion and love, because we're all fighting a hard struggle.
Thank you for admitting that, Sonia, because I think it's always, we all have biases. You know, the biases come from our life experiences. I don't have tons of interaction with police officers, and when I did, it was always good because my dad was a doctor and they were always, you know, helping with patients and things. So I appreciate you saying that, because we do come with judgments, and it's not always because we're inherently bad. It's just the experiences we've had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I am working on, you know, kind of how to show up with, you know, with other, how to work with white people who, for instance, like don't believe in things like white privilege and are don't, you know, think that you know, the police forces should, you know, we should keep increasing the funding. So I am just trying to remain open and listen and like you said around, you know, police, I know the stats about police officers and alcoholism and divorce rates and all the, so the systems like aren't serving any of us really. So like I said, we can create, we are creative, human beings are creative, we make beautiful things, we build beautiful community, and I feel like we're in a real paradigm shift right now where we can start instituting the change that we need to uplift everybody.
Thank you. Greg, when did you shift chairs?
I will tell you that I think I shifted chairs when Sean was talking about when he would see his parents did tell him that all police officers are bad, but he would just look down and turn and go the other direction. I thought, wow, I can't imagine how a young kid, and mostly in a Black neighborhood, would think that would have to do that. And I thought, well, what would I do if I were in his shoes? I would probably do the same exact thing. I would go, man, I don't want to talk to that guy. I'm going this way, you know. And so one of the things I talk about is with parents, and it happens in every community and every socioeconomic area, no matter where you're at. You hear parents, when parents got their kids and they see a cop, they go, hey, I'm going to have you put you in jail. That's why kids get a bad taste in their mouth. And that's why I try to embrace them in a way so that they're not afraid of me. Just as Sean said, I was not afraid of the cops. I just knew better than stay away from them. And I'm like, wow, it blew me away. It blew me away.
I don't know any Black friend. I don't know any Black friend anywhere in America who has not either learned it, seen it, or had the talk and can give me examples of growing up of a double standard. You know, kids playing on their bike and being pulled over on their bike. You stole the bike. You know, I was reading Michelle Obama's book and she's talking about her brother going off and he kept getting pulled over. Like it was a bike he had and it just kept like, who'd you steal the bike from? So it's definitely out there. And I think, you know, when it comes to systemic racism, it's a big term. And to me, it just stands for, if someone like Sean has the self-determination to get out, how hard is that process being made for him? Because anyone can say, I have the self-determination to get out, and it's very easy, a Candace Owens or people to say, you know, just pull yourself up. What are the actual impediments if you cannot get loans, if you cannot buy a house, if you're redlining, if there's gerrymandering, if there's, like, how many ways can we chip? And a lot of people are saying, well, that stuff doesn't necessarily exist now. And I'm like, A, it does, and B, you're still dealing with the result of it. If someone's parents could never buy a house in a nice area and get out, then that's the situation we're dealing with now. And so systemic is really like all these little things, difference in sentencing between cocaine and crack, difference in sentencing, you know, that's the stuff, the difference of being able to have bail money so that prisons are not just filled with people who can't pay bail. There's a lot of issues, you know, is it everything? Is it fair for people to say it's not my fault, it's entirely the system? Somewhere in the middle, but it's pretty bad when it's really hard to get out and you keep getting dinged left and right. People just want a fair shake. They just want a fair shake. Everyone does. The rural Trump voter wants a fair shake and the guy in Baltimore wants a fair shake. And I think that's what the systemic, as big as it is when you go to the specifics, it's really effing hard to get out, you know, to stand away from it. And so that's I think an important thing, is that there's no one answer for systemic. It's a variety of things that just kept chipping away. Thank you all. Greg, I really appreciate you joining this conversation because, you know, it's a life experience that's really hard for a lot of us to understand, but it has to be part of the equation. It has to be part of the conversation. I
absolutely.
mean, I can, with my belief, say, I don't think Greg should ever fire his gun again in the line of duty. And it's like, okay, that's great for you to say, Riaz, but you know nothing about policing. So I do think you're a vital part of this conversation. So thank you for having it. As your parting gift, I will connect you all in a chat thread. And ideally what happens is every episode I do, they just keep going and going and going and going. And here's a question and here's an article. And what do you think of this? It's just a bridge that you may not have had before. So you'll all be connected as stuff comes up or articles you want to see, or this happened, or I got chewed out for this. What do you think? It's just a nice way to connect. But I thank you all very much for taking the time and trusting the system. And again, here's another conversation that there's community, there's connection. There's absolutely things we all agree when we talk about them and not yell. So thank you all for being a part of this. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Sean, it's
Thanks,
nice meeting
everybody.
you. Sonia, it's nice meeting you.
Great to
Right after
meet
you,
y'all.
me as well.
Take care.
Bye, guys.
Have a
Take
great
care.
night.
Bye now.